Great folks. Well, let's bring them up. Jason, and of course we have the entire Bushnell family. Come on up, guys. I mean, I don't know. This is amazing. Look at these guys. Come on up. This guy with the Atari shirt. This is like Shadow of the Colossus right here. This is it. And I didn't realize you had so many children. I, of course, knew your daughter, and I knew this son. And this is only half this son.
Yeah,
yes, I didn't know.
I have a name.
I got to leave some stuff for Jason, but yeah, this is a lot of hot tub parties in the 70s. This is what happens, right? Anyway, this is
Too soon, Tommy.
too soon. Is it too soon? I'm giving it over to Jason. Here you go.
Great. All right. Well, thank you guys all for coming, and this is to me a great honor. You know, I wouldn't be up on this stage if it wasn't for Nolan and Atari and Chuck E. Cheese and all the things that Nolan's done to really create this, help create this industry for all of us. And not only did he do that, but he created a great family of folks that are now all in the games industry on their own as well. And so what we thought we would do today is give you kind of a chance to see what was it like growing up Bushnell, right, with games in your DNA. And so if you can imagine, we're now on maybe even people having the third generation of gamers out there in the industry. So this is kind of one of the first families of gaming. And I think it's really cool if you're a dad or a parent and you're thinking about how your kids are going to grow up with your influence. For us, I think it's a great time to learn from you guys what you learned from your dad and what he's learned from you.
And
so
we can also be warning signs, you know.
Exactly. All the good stuff and maybe a few of the bad things too. But so let's start with you, Nolan. You know, you got into this business and you really made a lot of innovations. But what was the point where you started with your kids to start to learn from what they wanted instead of what your great ideas were? Was there a point where you started to say, wow, that's not just my idea, that's the idea I'm learning from my own kids?
I think that there's a lot of things that if you play with your kids, you see what they like to do. And then you have to start kind of with a center of gravity. And my center of gravity was always active, not passive. So we were a family of projects. And everybody was always building stuff, inventing. We had a Lego loft and blocks and bricks and crazy stuff, and a shop where they could use any of the tools except those that would cut your fingers off. And so it was kind of fun, and I tried to make the house grab creativity. I mean, we were probably the only place that had an actual Dungeons and Dragons den that was down below the playroom and did all kinds of fun stuff. So I feel like the kids had a good opportunity to invent.
And we would definitely get berated for not being active. You know, what was it you said yesterday?
It was, I mean, I'll never forget, every time I was ever watching TV, and my dad walked in, he would say, "Oh, are you killing a few brain cells today?" And so, yeah, it was always
shaming.
Yeah, he never
shaming.
Punished us. He just guilt tripped us into like figuring out what we hated about us.
But you know, shame is good. See, like I've shoe shamed everybody here.
So he thinks.
But then I realized that Brent has pant shame.
It's serious pant shame going on.
And we've never seen Wyatt in a suit. So this is a whole new world up here.
It's called business casual.
Let's start over here. What's kind of your earliest memory of like the realization that, you know, your dad was somebody important in the games business, not just your dad, but you know, there's something you could learn from him, or what point in your life do you think you started to realize, wow, this is different. I've got an opportunity here, you know, or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the early indicators that Dad was big in games was that closets and rooms in the house would be tucked away with like random consoles or systems, and you know, not everyone's house has that, where you dig up a Vectrex and you're like, what's this? Let's plug it in and play it. Like, and so that was always fun and like a great way, exploratory kind of way to get into things.
And did you did you have an inkling like, yeah, I'm gonna go into this business? This is something, as a kid, did you start to think about that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also, visiting one of his companies back in the day, and seeing like level designs on the walls and stuff. You're like, oh, that looks like a fun game. I bet I could design a better level.
It's interesting that you knew that you wanted to. I really didn't want to. Like, and in fact had always raised us to be fiercely independent, working on our own stuff. For me, I was like, well, I'm gonna not do that, and ended up going either web hosting and web design. Tyler and I worked on auto salvage systems, and it really wasn't until I met my co-founder Eric and we started collaborating that, and the art that we made turned into games, and I was like, oh my God, what have I been doing? I know so much about this. Why am I not in games? But it took, kind of a 20-year cycle.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same way. I didn't know I wanted to go into games, but when I was like, okay, I have to go earn money, like, what do I know? Oh, it's games.
Yeah.
And that's how I wound up here.
And
See, I'm not in the game industry in the sense that I'm not a game developer. I play casual games, but I'm a storyteller and I tell stories about the people in the gaming industry. Mm-hmm. And I found my way through from more of a communications angle and making sure I'm like, okay, so wait, he's got a story to tell. How do we craft, how does that look like? And that in itself is a game, but it's got more of a narrative to it.
He was, one of the things I remember so well was the lifeboat and the rocket ship. And he was talking to me about like, hey, what do you want to do when you grow up? What are you going to work on? And he's like, listen, you have to have the lifeboat, the thing that's going to make your money, the thing that you can rely on. And always putting some time into the rocket ship, right? The rocket ship's the thing you want to do, the thing that is going to be your life's work, the thing that you really can't wait to work on, but that you can't have the rocket ship without the lifeboat. And that has stuck with me for a really long time, because you sort of.
I remember our collaboration on Worlds. That started when Tyler and I were driving back from Yosemite. I was one of the guard teachers, what have you. And we started talking about doing the thing. And it turned into a hell of a project that everybody got involved. I let the kids miss school.
We were obsessed with the Magic the Gathering at the time, making our own collectible, tradable card game, and so this was sort of really Photoshop 1.0, and we started collaborating, making our own. We wanted a sci-fi version. We were all super sci-fi nerds, and so we wanted a sci-fi version of Magic, and so we started collaborating, making that. But we were like, driving to Kinko's to make print runs. We ended up licensing it to Topps baseball cards, of which we never actually got any of the money. We found that out later.
Okay. You were giving them the real lesson.
I remember giving them each $1,000.
In your memory. I would so remember $1,000 in high school.
Oh
my God.
Had like $100 at one time.
So we learned how to play games from this guy. We learned how to play business from this guy. There were always rules that were sort of there, but sort of not there. Rules are an idea.
Oh, you mean game rules?
Yeah, everything.
I mean, he's the one that taught me how to
play business.
cheat.
Yeah.
Well, I feel that learning how to cheat and not get caught is really an important life skill.
Yeah, you just never figured out the second part.
Oh, well. We learned early on Dad couldn't be banker at Monopoly.
And if you've ever played the game of Pounce, where you have 20 cards in your Pounce pile, his would only have 10. And you're like, how'd you win? Oh.
But I think that's an important thing, right? You want to guide your kids. And so what was the point where you realized they're suddenly starting to teach you life lessons instead of you having to teach them?
Incessantly. I mean, really, if you have kids and they're smart, you realize very quickly that they know more about so many things than you do, like everything, and everything about being a teenager, which you've totally forgotten, and everything about being an adolescent, a preteen, and so what happens is they constantly recalibrate you.
Which is why he kept having kids. This is only half of the Bushnell family. We were all the beta testers, and when one hit the next demographic, he's like, oh wait, we gotta fill the new one.
That's interesting you say that though too, because dads are famous for being know-it-alls, right? And this guy's no exception. He would also though throw in like something that was totally outlandish when you'd be asking him a question, and so you'd be like, what? That's not really? That's the case? And you'd be like, oh yeah, and he'd defend it, and then you'd go and look it up in the encyclopedia at the time, and you'd be like, oh, that's not right. He's wrong. And so you'd come back to him, and it was only years later that we learned that he was doing this on purpose to cause us to question everything. And don't, if you can't trust dad to give you real information, then you can't trust anyone. So like, always dig up your own information, ask your own questions.
The dark underbelly of the Bushnell upbringing.
How about what's the first? Now, I've heard that you guys are a little competitive, just a little bit.
Well, there'd have to be competition for us to be competitive.
Oh, okay. I hear it's already getting thrown down. But what's the point where do you remember like the first time you actually beat your dad at a game or something like that?
Yeah, it was just any video game.
Any. At about two, with first controller in your hand.
Pretty much.
How about you, Brent?
The one that was crazy was random was arm wrestling. And I'll never forget, that was a weird moment, because I was like, because at the time, you could do everything, and I could do nothing, and then it was like when I beat you at arm wrestling, I was like, wow, this is crazy.
Well, I can remember when Brent and I wrestled for the first time, and I decided that was really a dumb thing to do. And I never wrestled any of my other kids before or after, because I was sore for a week.
Tyler, how about you? Do you have an early memory of like
Name's
the point?
Wyatt.
Sorry, I meant that.
I get it.
My
Yeah,
apologies.
no, Tyler's right there.
I know. I
Wyatt,
was looking at
different
Tyler.
person.
My fault.
We did network multiplayer of Warcraft 2.
Warcraft 2.
And yeah, just one game and just slaughtered him. It was just.
You were lucky on that one, because I was
and then
really
and
good
then
at
I was
that
lucky the second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth time too.
I actually think Warcraft 1 was the first time I beat you at something.
Yeah.
one. Right.
And Lords of the Realm, yeah. big
I
one.
beat him at Tank.
At Tank.
We're dating. I'm dating myself, but
Yeah, Tank, Warcraft 1, Warcraft 2.
at least, like I said, different demographic.
Now, it's interesting for me as growing up as a fan, of course, I got the chance to meet Nolan when I was at Microsoft, and you were working on a system called Uwink, and some of the audience may not know that, but Nolan innovated, I think, with touchscreens and bringing that to public environments with a project called Uwink, which I thought was just awesome. And we actually had one of them in our house for a long time, and our kids just loved it. But that was probably the first time when I met Brent as well, and so this was kind of at this phase where not just being a kid, but now you're kind of working for your dad. And maybe that's kind of a little bit of a different experience when your dad's the boss as opposed to just the dad of the house. So is there any lessons as you started to get into the workforce? What's it like working for your dad or having to work for family like that?
It was interesting. A lot of our family was involved in Uwink. Alissa was doing the PR at the time. Another sister who's not on the stage was working on it. And one of the things that was fascinating is we would get home and Sunday night family dinner, all we would talk about was Uwink. And so for any of the family members that were not involved, they grew to hate it. Because they were like, can we talk about something else? And I actually think that any, people working with family, working with their significant other or whatnot, I really learned to have to set firm boundaries in, when you start to bring family and friends into business, you sort of have to be really strict of like, hey, this is that other time, that family reserved time that's not business, that is sacred, and is important. And it was fun working together. But I think for the rest of our family, it was really important to make time to be a family.
Yeah, and one of the things that we also learned is know your swim lane, right? So, and respect each other's swim lanes. So when Brent wouldn't tell me how to do PR and I wouldn't tell him how to code, right? So we had to really learn to respect and trust what each of us was good at. And that's where it got easy once we defined those swim lanes and really respected each other. And that now, I mean, I wouldn't want to work, I love working with my family. It's one of my favorite joys.
What's great about having your kids work for you is you know their motivations are the right way. And in many cases, they're the smartest people you know. And so it just sort of wipes out a whole bunch of things because you know you can trust them, you know they're on the right side of decisions, and they're talented. And so it helps when you have a smart wife so that the kid's DNA is really good.
We'll make sure and bring that one back. We'll tell her that you said that.
Do you have any other memories of like the first job? Was your first job working for your dad?
Working for Ewink, actually. Yeah. And you know, one thing about your dad being the boss, or at least for us, was that meant you had to double prove yourself, right? And so like the last thing you want is everyone else at the company being like, oh, you've got this job just because of that, and you have no skill. And so you'd really make sure that you're working twice as hard as everyone else.
It's called the nepotism curse,
Curse.
as opposed to benefit.
Well, I always joke, because you know, a lot of families involved in Two Bit, I always joke that nepotism's only a problem if they suck.
I keep waiting for the day that nepotism is like a blessing, you know? It's always a bummer.
Instead of the curse.
Yeah, I wish I made more because of my last name. That would be awesome. That would be so cool.
Yeah, notoriously underpay the family.
Did you all work for free for a while, or?
So many times.
So many times. So how about you? What's for each of them as they started to work for you and started to not just be your kids, but be somebody that that worked for you? What type of lessons did you start to find yourself learning from your kids that you've taken with you now?
Well, I think that I always found that they saw things slightly different than I did, because I had all this baggage from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and so they were constantly resetting me up to the current level of thinking. And quite frankly, your HR skills have to be different than they were in the 70s.
I think there's a few more stories.
No
to that
comments.
statement.
All right, moving on.
Next
But the thing that was interesting is Wyatt, you know, was mouse literate as like a 3-year-old or something. You know, I mean, like he really, you know, was the first one that grew up with technology the whole time. You know, and so you know, I mean, he was playing around on tablets before he really was like speaking complete sentences, and that was for me awesome to watch. You know, how really the term digital native, how native he was.
Well, I mean, you know, I didn't really ever work directly for Dad. But my first job was because of him, and he basically told me, like, learn how to program websites, and I was like 10 or 11, and I was learning Flash and web contract and web development. So I basically web contracted and developed software throughout like middle school and high school. That's how I paid for everything, because there's no allowance, which was a bummer.
I really learned an interesting lesson from you. During those web hosting days, I was a programmer at the time, and I was like, oh, I can help Wyatt. I'll help him get leads. So I wrote a little Python script to walk Yelp and find all of the restaurants that didn't have websites. And it would put a little report of the restaurants that didn't have websites, or the ones that did have websites and were written in Flash, so he could sort of know who to go after. And the next week I said, hey, Wyatt, how'd that go? And he's like, oh, yeah, about that. You know, I modified it, and now it's auto-swiping for me on Tinder.
It was OkCupid. Tinder wasn't around then.
It's auto-emailing, you know, and I was like, wow, okay.
From the ages of 18 to 20, I did very well. Just for the record. Yeah, that's what it's like to grow up Bushnell.
So what did you guys start to learn from each other as, you know, fellow Bushnell family, and starting to see your own paths emerge, you know, and separate career paths and things like that? How did you start to
This is like
keep
my
in
favorite
touch?
part of our family. because like we all just trust each other implicitly, so we like all advise each other on our different ventures. And when you totally trust somebody, you really hear a lot about how their business actually operates and how their business works, and you can cross-correlate that. And we just all have each other's backs, right? Like, I really want Brent and Tyler and Alissa to be successful, because then I can ride those coattails. There we go. I was saying tail.
And I want them all to be successful so that they can keep me in Sunny Acres instead of that cheap place.
Well, one of them should probably end up taking care of you, right?
Jason, you.
So now each of you guys have moved on to your own businesses and are working on many different things, and so maybe we could get an insight as to is there anything that you learned growing up that has helped you choose the trajectory that you're on now, that you've got your own and please do a little bit of an introduction for the audience about what you are working on.
Yeah, so we're building a connected arcade platform for social gaming and social spaces. And really both like experience at UWink. This is like almost a reiteration of UWink in a different form. And just growing up with also so many siblings, we love playing together. And we generally feel like that's a section of gaming that has been largely ignored. Physical in-person together, shoulder rubbing, high-fiving experiences.
Like board games around the family kitchen table.
Yeah, exactly. And so that, just the whole upbringing has really influenced what we're doing.
We have a number of Tyler's Polycades here in the park.
Yeah. So if you don't recognize Brent is the CEO and the founder of Two Bit Circus here that we're here. Thank you again for hosting us.
Hey, we're so excited to have you guys. This is like a dream come true.
Yeah. Really thank you for. So maybe Brent, you could give a little bit of insight to how did you come up with this?
Yeah, the concept of a micro amusement park really evolved out of work that we'd been doing for almost a decade. I met my co-founder Eric Gradman in 2008. We started collaborating, making interactive art for fun that we could take to parties, and the art turned into rooms of laser beams and walls of buttons, and we were really this high-tech circus dragging these interactive things around to events. People liked it, and all of a sudden brands started calling, and we were doing all the entertainment for Amazon's holiday party and big pop-up events. Ultimately did our own traveling carnival because we're a bunch of idiots. And then finally said, let's go permanent, and started building this place. So we started that in 2016, but each time we kind of were converging on a permanent physical space. The carnival was successful, people loved it, but setting all that up for a weekend was a nightmare. And it was right as Macy's and Sears was going away, we said, hey, we could build a template that we could replicate to all of those exiting department stores, and crafted this.
Is there any lessons, positive and negative, from, say, your dad's experiences over the years with things like Chuck E. Cheese or with all the other ideas that he's had, that he's brought to, that you took both positive and negative?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, interestingly, that interactive theater over there, what they're calling the boss stage, has touchscreens on every table. It looks a lot like UWink. We did UWink in 2006. It was first the cabinet you had in your home, and then it was a dedicated restaurant, and there was touchscreens on every table. You could order from the tables and play games against everybody. People didn't even really know how to use touchscreens at the time. We were having to say, hey, it's a screen, you can touch it. This is how that works. But the part that was my favorite part about that was less the food ordering and much more the 100-person multiplayer gaming in public, right, all together live, and so that was where the genesis of that room came from.
And how about for you? What type of things do you think you've taken both positive and negative as you're approaching your own business and your own career from the experience of growing up Bushnell? Is there something like a really core positive life lesson?
I mean, everything I know because of my dad. I mean, I have no college education. I dropped out of high school, so I learned everything from I'm the youngest of eight children, and I have Nolan as my dad. So Education right there.
He moved. Wyatt was not so engaged in even in high school. Got his high school equivalency, and then moved in with me. As
I don't have a high
year.
school equivalent.
Oh, you don't even have
Yeah,
that?
no. I'm like full dropout.
Wow.
I have no GED. I mean, there's no record of me attending school ever. Well, no, there's record of me attending, not of finishing.
Although we could argue this family is a pretty good school.
Yeah, no, totally. They're all pass-fail. But yeah, I mean, like, for me, the whole reason, so I built arcade games. I built Space Squad for 2-Bit, which is their story room thing, and Out on the Floor, King of the Road is like my first solo arcade game.
That 8
So I'm like an indie arcade developer. And the
Great Forest Challenge.
Yeah, I've bumbled around this stupid space forever, like for the past 8 years. So yeah, there's a sea of shit I've done, and so but the whole reason I'm in this space is because I like games, and the one thing my dad like nailed in my head with an ice pick was never go into a red ocean, which is only hit markets that don't compete with anyone. Right? And out-of-home entertainment needs more attractions. There just aren't that many game developers in this space. Like, am I going to go and make a mobile game? Oh my God, no. Because mobile isn't about making a good game. It's about making a game that you can scream the loudest about. And so I hate competition, even though I beat these guys in video games all the time. Business competition, bad.
Is there something that you learned from his career that says wow, that's something I should make sure to not do?
Oh God, jeez, that's a brutal question.
That's a brutal one.
Yeah, it's okay, family PR. What do I say? I don't know. I guess okay.
I don't even know where to go.
Yeah, I would say my dad is the best big thinker I know. He's 9,000 miles above everything, and he sees long-term strategy really well. But I think one of his shortcomings is just kind of the day-to-day and the nitty-gritty of anything, and you would agree.
Agreed.
Yeah. And
if it bores me, I'm bad at it.
Yeah, if it bores him, and I do think especially with games, you can take a game to 90%, but the thing that makes it successful is that last 10%, which is the long and boring and arduous hellscape that is development. And so, okay, question answered, done.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. I think in a lot of cases maybe we felt or Dad felt and maybe was communicated to us that he sold too soon in a lot of cases, right? And so where that last 10% of kind of going through the motions and ratcheting up is maybe the more boring part of it. That's also when things get really big and super exciting as well.
Yeah, and for me as a dad, I'm happy if my kids learn from some of my failures, because we learn a lot more from our failures than sometimes from our successes. So I think it's quite all right. How about from your perspective? What do you think you've learned for your career?
Well, I think we're not afraid to take risks.
Yeah.
I think when you look at, and he taught me early, when I first took over doing Nolan's PR and being his publicist, I put him with an editor at Fortune, and they asked him, "Oh, what did you think of Steve Jobs?" And he said, "Oh my God, he was a nightmare." And I was like, really? Do you have to say that? But the thing is or he said something about PS2 and that the latency. I mean, he just and I was like, oh my God, this is going to be my worst client ever. But what happened was that ability to take the risk and to say the truth, was honest and real and told an authentic story that really raised his awareness and kept him that visionary that he is. So I had to learn to trust that he may say some crazy stuff, and oh my God, please let it be okay. But like, and risk is okay. Risk can be okay. And for a PR person who likes control, which you can tell I thrive in this family environment and I really succeed in that control, said me never.
Herding cats.
It's herding cats, but like it works. Sometimes it works. And I think that that's like being able to be comfortable with risk and being okay with failure and knowing that like you have to get back up and try again and again and again is something that I think is very innate in our DNA and who we are. You just don't sit on the side. Would you want to sit on the sidelines or you want to go play?
Well, I want to point out a big part of our family is humor. We all laugh and say snarky things to each other. I've often said our dinner table is verbal hand-to-hand combat. And that if you can survive in our environment, you have really thick skin. You know, so you know the whole idea.
Wyatt's testament to that.
You try having 7 older siblings. Like, yeah, you can't make me cry.
We were joking in the back before we came on stage. I'm like, and we were crafting the tweet for Dad to say, and I'm like, he's about to go on stage with his favorite children. I'm like, oh, the other ones will hate that. But we didn't say that.
But you know, I think that part of creativity is being a little bit of an anarchist. If you believe in rules, you don't break them. And that truncates your ability to think outside the box. And so I've tried very hard to have these kids who are humor-driven, out-of-the-box driven, and smart as hell, and that just really works for me.
The one quote that I love of yours, which is like, everybody's good at having fun, but not everybody is good at like working and being creative and like doing stuff. And so it's like, do you want to be the party guy who's like, anybody can be a party guy, anybody can be fun at a party, but it's like the people that go back and like work on a cool project and do that stuff. Those are the people you want to be around.
The corollary was, if it was easy to make $1 million, more people would be doing it. And I'll never forget hearing that.
Yeah.
And I was like at the end of something, it just wasn't working, and it was like, you know, I was just like at the end of my rope, and he's like, yeah, Brent, if it was easy to make $1 million, more people would be doing it.
Yeah. It's just like life is just 1 week you're in a pit of despair, and then like the next week it's cool, and then the next week it's a pit of despair again. Yeah, just the peaks and valleys of entrepreneurship.
Right. Yeah, we get to relate to each other on that. You want a peak or a valley?
Yeah. Valley.
Well, the thing that I really like about what these kids are doing is every one of their businesses is out of the box. Slightly different business model. There's nothing else like it in reality. And to the extent that I can take any credit for it, I really appreciate that. I mean, I come down to Two Bit Circus, and I'm so proud. And I see, you know, Tyler's stuff, and I say, man, you know, and I ask him, how's your production going? And he says, great, and we did a redesign and done all that, you know. And then Wyatt, of course, just Wyatt, you know.
That's sweet. Yeah, let's keep up the charade on stage.
No.
Yeah. I was gonna say this is really heartwarming, and then you just totally ruined it.
No, Wyatt basically did a big deal. I can't announce it, but
Yeah,
on the
don't.
road.
Yeah. Wow. Cool.
And Alissa, I just hired her for my new company.
Yeah.
And it's X2, and
We're not talking about that.
But it's
take some
really
time for
cool,
questions?
and it's blue
Yeah.
ocean.
Oh yeah, let's do questions. Oh, let's stop this.
Please.
Would like to turn it back over to you. First, real quick, how many of you here have kids? Can you raise your hand?
Wow.
So,
Awesome.
so this is an amazing time for our industry, right? We really are in that phase where now we're seeing the second generation, and we're all thinking about the same things. How can we do great for our kids? And first, tell them not to be in the games industry, how tough it is. But But second, if they are going to, because every single one of them has said they want to, what can we do to help them? So let's take some questions from the audience for the panel here. Over here, can you introduce your name? So the question from the audience is, how do you balance that time between giving them a chance to learn about being in the games industry by playing games, but also balance that with the time away from screens and other activities outside of games and electronics?
So I'm the only one up here who has kids, other than him. And I will say that that is a challenge that I deal with on a regular basis, being from a gaming family, a video game family, and my 11-year-old loves Minecraft like nobody's business. But she also loves, and I force her to go outside and to play in the real world, because I think that there's a sense. Now, mind you, we all learned how to solder when we were like 6. So we also do that and make sure that there's the hands-on making component, because that's really the foundation of all that we've done is starting from that hands-on builder, maker type of experience. So play those games. My daughter loves, like now she's playing Crossy Road, and so there's all these games that you can play, but balance it with that physical world, I would say.
Yeah, and all the kids at age 4 learned how to use the hot glue gun, and my wife said they're going to burn themselves. I said, yeah, and then they'll learn not to. And they almost burned the house down 2 or 3 times with soldering irons. And so there was always this mix between doing a little bit of playing and building stuff. And hot glue guns are perfect for putting weird stuff together. And in your house, you want to have a lot of stuff. And a lot of stuff is, think of them as the building blocks of creativity, because you've got to be able to build stuff. So in my office right now, I could build a space shuttle with the parts I have on hand.
It wouldn't get very far, but he could build it. Yeah.
The one other that I'd throw out, I don't have kids yet, but Two Bit's done a lot of work in learning and education. There's an excellent article called The Play Deficit, and it really makes a case for unstructured time. Like no screen time, but also not a team sport, not a lesson for music. Like let them go out and just like get in the mud, or just like unstructured time is, I think, really critical.
I mean, for me, my parents were kind of burnt out by the time I rolled around, so I kind of just had free reign, and I played a lot of video games. So
and look what happened.
Yeah, I mean, if you want somebody that's really charming and funny, just game all the time.
I used to joke that they were so strict with when I had to be home, my curfew and everything. Wyatt literally could have had a meth lab in the basement.
It did. The web contracting was just a front.
Well, for you people who don't have kids, would you go out and procreate? And the reason is, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Idiocracy, but all the smart people aren't having enough kids.
Oh, God. Okay.
And it's really not.
Game over. Next question.
Thank God it's only 30 seconds left.
Here it gets in. So we're actually wrapping up out of time, so I apologize. We can't take another question because we're wrapping up, and I really want to thank all of you guys for giving an insight as to what it's like growing up with a famous father, with Nolan as your dad.
You're welcome.
Thank you for sharing, and thank you guys for being here, and I'm sure they'll be around for our questions afterwards. Thank you.